Hello and welcome back. So in today's video, I want to talk to you about how living by your cycle can really help to improve your overall health and also improve your overall fertility as well. If you are brand new here, my name is Bettina and I'm a yoga teacher. I specialize in yoga for fertility, for pregnancy, birth, and early motherhood. The reason I share this now is because this is what has helped me so much to really learn to listen to my body and to take really good care of myself, and ultimately to go from having 3 unexplained losses in a row to conceiving and delivering our healthy baby boy Luca. So what do I mean by living by your cycle? So we all know about the menstrual cycle, but some of us, I think, just think of the cycle part as when our period arrives, and we kind of just think of 2 different phases. So that time when you have your period and that time you don't have your period. And if you've been on the contraceptive pill or some other sort of hormonal contraception, that probably is your experience of it. We only really have those 2 different phases. But once you come off this hormonal contraception, you'll notice we actually have 4 different phases of the cycle. And if you start to sort of carefully watch your emotions, your mood, your appetite, how your body feels, you'll notice that it does change throughout the 4 phases. And why does it change? Because the level of hormones in our body is changing. It has to change in order for us to be healthy, fertile beings and to create a baby, which is why it makes sense to want to work with these hormones and work with what your body's doing rather than kind of pushing against it in a really sort of masculine way. And our hormones influence more than just when our period arrives. Hormones change our energy levels, our cognitive state. So that's why during your period, you often feel like kind of like spacey and almost baby brainish. And then at other times in the cycle, you feel really alert and logical and focused. Your hormones change what you need nutritionally. So at different times of the cycle, you have different nutritional requirements. It changes your libido. Obviously, during ovulation, your libido changes and increases because that makes biological sense. Your body is trying to procreate. And if your libido doesn't peak at that point, it's a really good sign that your hormones and your cycle is out of balance. This is why living by the cycle can really help to improve that. Your hormones can also affect your weight. So you may notice if you're someone who tracks your weight quite closely, it changes depending on whether you've got your period, whether you're ovulating, and also your skin. So if, like me, you break out in this particular area, that's often a hormonal sign. And for me at the moment, it is a sign that 1 year after having my last baby, I've recently given up breastfeeding. My hormones are still trying to balance out and they're still a little bit haywire. So typically as women, our cycle is around 28 days, although that's really just the standard number. For many, it is longer, 35, 38, perhaps longer if you're really quite out of balance, or for some women it's shorter as well. So I honestly recommend the first thing you start doing is just tracking your cycle, not expecting it to be anything, but just noting down, okay, on this day my period arrived, I felt like this, noting any body changes, noting any changes to energy levels and things like that, because that's honestly the best way to get a picture of what's going on in your body is for about 3 months, tracking what's going on for you, and then hopefully we start to see a little bit of a pattern. So while we move through that 28 to 35-ish cycle, men move through a daily cycle. So they go through the cycle of in the morning, their hormones peak and they have this high energy, and then sort of it starts to wane in the afternoon and then slide into bedtime, which is kind of how we all live day to day. Yes, we have this daily cycle. Whereas for us, our energy and our hormones cycle through this month-ish long period and it changes how we feel. So that's what I want to talk about today, sort of the different changes you might expect throughout the different stages of your cycle. Again, if you're really out of balance, it might not follow this exact logical system, but as you start to track your cycle and get to know yourself a little bit better, you will probably start to see a bit of a pattern. So I first started looking into this after my first loss, and it was because I was just feeling like I needed to get to know my body a little bit better, and I was feeling like that week before my period, I was a raging mess. I was hypercritical, I would be snappy and irritable, and then 2 weeks later, it was like I was literally a different person. I was productive, I was motivated, I was logical, and it just felt like, why is this, like, why do I cycle through this? And I started noticing there was a bit of a pattern around when these sorts of moods and feelings would arrive, and by understanding them and being able to predict them, it was so helpful to look after myself better, and I knew when to back off in life and not put so much pressure on myself, and I knew when to push a little harder because I kind of had those energy reserves. So I'm going to go into the 4 different phases, and I like to talk about them in terms of the seasons of the year, because we all understand the seasons of the year. We see the natural world changing around us, and I think it just really helps to understand and remember the kind of energy systems that go on at this time. Now, if you are looking specifically for fertility, I have made longer videos about each of the phases, and I'll link those below. So that will go into how to practice yoga in those specific phases. But for this video, let's just go into kind of a brief overview of the 4 different phases. So we start with cycle day 1, your period arrives, and this is our winter phase. It usually lasts for about 5 to 7 days. You might feel like you enter your winter a couple of days before your period arrives. And just like winter, it feels like you want to turn inward. You want to move slower, you want to rest more. So just like the natural season where it gets colder, we start to kind of hibernate a little. This is what our body naturally wants to do during menstruation. Now, before we go any further, I'd love to ask you, how many of you actually rest at this time, or actually give yourself that permission to rest? And if you don't worry. Many of us have been brought up to believe that we need to keep going. Like, you think about the ads about any products for periods. We see images of women using tampons in their togs, going swimming, and it's kind of presented as, use these products and nothing will stop you. You don't have to stop your regular life. You can still wear your white pants. You can still go swimming. And it's like, actually, the body does this as kind of a reset, and we need to rest. It's almost like a mini birth. If you think about what the body's doing, the uterus is contracting to release the uterine lining. So just like when you're giving birth, you wouldn't expect to be going out and going for a big run or doing anything highly energetic or social. So this is really the energy we want to embody during our winter, because if we can rest more here, it's almost like the better care that you take of yourself when you have your period, the better you'll feel through the rest of your cycle, the more fertile you'll be, the more energy reserves your body will have to put into ovulation if you're trying to make a baby. And it just makes so much sense that we need to rest and really nurture ourselves at this time. So after winter, obviously comes spring, and this is a return to energy. So this is pre-ovulation. So once the period has finished, leading up until a couple of days before you ovulate. And just like spring, the energy is starting to get a little bit lighter. We often feel more motivated. Our logical mind comes back. So what's happening hormonally is the estrogen is rising. So during your period, you have the lowest hormonal levels at all. They all kind of drop, go offline for a little bit. And then during the spring phase, pre-ovulation, your estrogen levels are rising. So that's when that logical brain starts to come back. So unlike your winter, you're probably feeling more sociable, more outgoing, maybe even a little bit flirty. It's really that light energy. Remember, every woman is different and every cycle is different. I've spoken to women who during this stage, because they kind of feel a little bit maybe directionless in their life, they're not really sure what's going, that spring energy where you want to kind of focus and put a bit more effort into things can feel quite overwhelming, and they feel a little bit anxious and a little bit fragile even, because it makes them feel uncomfortable in their own skin. So if you feel like this during spring, don't worry. There are things that you can do to feel better. I really recommend at this stage you just start noticing and seeing if there is a pattern for you and what helps to support you throughout the different stages. So then we move into our summer phase. So this is that mother energy. This is ovulation. This is when we feel like we can do and be everything for everyone. And this is probably the only stage of the cycle that you can actually, if you've looked after yourself well in the other phases, have the energy to do that. We're very outward and giving and loving in this phase. We're obviously feeling sexy. This is when we go into Beyonce mode, and it's just like you can take on the world. You can give to everyone. You've got so much energy. I will add a little caveat to that, in that if you are trying to make a baby, don't give all of your energy to everyone else. You want to channel this giving, nurturing, creation energy into you and your partner, and obviously your own body as well. And then finally we head into our autumn, which is our premenstrual phase, which obviously will be different depending on whether you have conceived or not. If you have conceived, you're going on a whole different track into pregnancy, which is a cycle of its own. But if you haven't conceived, you are in that premenstrual phase where your body is gearing up towards menstruation again. So the hormone levels are starting to die. During our ovulation, those hormones are the highest, so that progesterone, that really feel-good hormone, is quite present. And then if you have conceived, that progesterone stays high, but if you haven't, it starts to wane and you head back in towards that menstruation period. So this phase of the cycle can be quite negative. It is actually a phase of creative energy, but I think it can either go one of two ways. It can be quite destructive or it can be quite positively creative, but you have to channel it. So I think it's really important to learn about yourself during this phase and how you can channel your energy in a way that's really positive. So I personally myself find that during this phase, I need a lot more solo time. So I'm heading towards my menstruation where I need a whole lot of time to myself. But in this particular phase, I'm starting to need more of that. So planning less social events, having more downtime, because if I don't, I find I start kind of like nitpicking on my closest relationships, which is obviously not good. And I also need a creative project that will keep me focused. It's not an outward creative project, but more so those private creative projects, those things that I do just for myself. And having that is a way to really channel that creative energy so that it doesn't become like destructive energy, if that makes sense. Let me know in the comments below if you can relate to this sort of destructive feeling that you get during that premenstrual phase. And in particular, when we're talking about the 2-week wait, so this is obviously the 2-week wait, if you are trying to conceive, I think this is a really good reminder that you need to channel your energy during this time so it doesn't become destructive. So I think during the 2-week wait, it can become this quite anxious, constantly checking the body for symptoms, or you can really channel it into something positive, visualizing your baby and doing meditations around the future you want to create, or even just doing activities that make you really happy and feel really positive. So that's a really good way to channel that energy rather than kind of slipping into those negative habits and obsessions that often come up during this premenstrual 2-week wait phase. So that was a really quick snapshot of the 4 different stages. If you'd like to know more about them and how to live by them a little bit more, so the sort of self-care that you can do, the practices that you can do during these phases of the cycle, let me know in the comments and I'll create a video on each of the different phases and do a bit of a deep dive into what you should be doing, maybe what you should avoid doing, and how to really support your body during this time with things like food and rest and all that sort of good stuff. But finally, before I go, why should you live by your cycle instead of just ignoring it and pushing through? Many women I talk to, and myself included, have less PMS symptoms when you live by the cycle. So I honestly find if I take that rest during my menstruation and I really look after myself during that time, I have a better ovulation, so it's more outgoing, more energetic, more motivated. Don't have those really destructive, negative feelings of anxiety during that premenstrual phase. So it really helps to balance everything out. If you can work with your natural rhythm, it's kind of like instead of pushing shit uphill, you learn to move and go with what is presented with you, kind of flow with life rather than pushing against life all the time. So why are our PMS symptoms less? Because we're learning to balance our hormones. So instead of releasing all that stress into the body, and that's what's happening. If you're pushing during your menstruation, your body is saying rest. I need to rest, I need to relax, I need to turn inwards, connect with my intuition. If you ignore that, you're just like going with this adrenaline bomb, and your body has to run on adrenaline and has to run on empty. And what that's doing is telling your body it is stressed. And as a result, it sends all of your energy, all of the goodness away from the reproductive system, and it sends it to your fight or flight system, that survival system. And that's where we don't want our energy to be if we're trying to conceive. We want to send it to our reproductive organs, to our endocrine system. So this is why working with that natural rhythm helps to really tell your body it's okay and it can be healthy and fertile and get back into balance with those hormones instead of running on stress hormones all the time. You also just feel better when you work by this cycle. It's a really natural, productive rhythm to get into when you follow this. You don't end up feeling like you're fighting yourself. I don't know about you, but I used to find I'd get really like disheartened on projects I was working on because one week I'd be going like gangbusters and then the next week I'd be just like, blah, I just want to watch Netflix. And I'd feel really disheartened, like, oh, maybe this isn't right for me, maybe I shouldn't bother. But when you start to learn, it's okay, it's just this week or the next 2 weeks, and in another couple of weeks' time, I'll have that energy back, I'll have that motivation back. You can kind of go easy on yourself a little bit, just do little bits instead of trying to do everything at once, and really capitalize on your cycle so that you're planning in that week or 2 weeks when you know your energy is going to be high, you can really go all in. And then give yourself permission to rest when you need it. And you will find that instead of ending up in burnout, which is what I used to do, I used to just kind of push through and end up just, honestly, for months on end at times, I would just have no motivation because I'd burnt myself out. But if you can start to live by your cycle, yes, of course, there will be weeks where you don't get as much done and you will need to rest. But in balancing that, there will also be weeks where you'll get so much done, you will surprise yourself. So let me know in the comments what you think about all this, whether you've already noticed in your body that your body cycles through these different phases. I'll leave a link below to my blog where you can download a little chart to start charting your cycle if you're interested in doing that. But you could also just do it in a notebook and just write the day of your cycle and what's going on. And remember to let me know if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more in-depth information on each of the phases. We can create some videos on that as well. If you want specific yoga classes for the different phases, specifically if you're trying to conceive, I have a 4-part yoga series that gives you yoga classes for each of the different phases of the cycle and are really geared towards trying to conceive. So how you can maximize your fertility during each of those phases. All right, I have a feeling this is going to be a really long video once I get to editing it. Thank you for staying till the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Namaste.